My dad's family, one little part of it, goes back to the 1600s when they sailed up the York River in a ship named Safety. And they offloaded in King and Queen County. And the direct line went back to one gentleman and two youngsters. When those three individuals got off the ship near West Point. And over the years, they moved from one county to the next westward, up the river.
Until they settled here?
All of them, well, over the years, one line stayed here in this area. I have grandparents and all the rest buried in many cemeteries. You know? Some are even not officially cemeteries.
Yeah.
You grew up as a child here.
Absolutely.
Tell me some of your memories from your childhood of this area.
Orange was totally different. Looking back, it hasn't changed that much. Socially, I doubt it. I don't think it would have changed a whole lot. But back in the time I grew up, kids ran free through the town of Orange. And if you had a bicycle, that really made things easy to do. More trouble to get into. Well, sometimes I go back to the great event of the tractor-trailer wreck that was at the bottom of the hill across from Willow Grove. And the tractor-trailer was full of oranges, totally full of oranges. The curve used to be very sharp at the foot of that hill. This truck didn't make it. Ended out in a field. The tractor had been picked up and gone, but the trailer remained and it had flattened. Get your bikes, boys, there's a wreck. We learned about it a day or two late because when we got there, we had to search for all the oranges we got. And we were hampered in how many we could get by ride a bicycle with an orange in your hand or in your pocket or whatever you could do. But we also stripped that old trailer of every reflector and so on from it. Now, the town of Orange was a busy place for kids, but kids would instigate things on their own. And some primary people usually played into the picture somehow, and Donald and John Faulkner fit that category. I remember quite well because Donald and I were very close our entire life.
That's okay.
We had a club in the town of Orange. The club had been a chicken house in the backyard of the Faulkners, which is where Taylor Park is now. Every summer, this little club we would have a carnival, as we would call it, and everyone had saved up this or that. Comic books, for instance, were rolled up, take a 2x4 or something and put nails through from the bottom and throw One of the things we had were regular hoops, but also jar rubbers for canning.
Yeah.
And if you hooked one of them, you got the comic book. We had, of course, Dunk the Apples. That's all sorts of things going on. They had a pony at that time and kept it there at the house. That back area, which is now a parking lot, was an open field. That's where all the baseball and football games were held. We, well, Don and John had what we called a tractor. It was open, no metalwork, no fenders, no fuselage or anything. We would give tractor rides, but the tractor ride was a trailer behind it. I think that was made from an old rear axle of an automobile. Had two wheels. The front was, the engine was open, just mounted on a chassis, and had a steering wheel, and you got up in front and grabbed the flywheel and gave it a big pull to get it started. You took what you had and made something of it. It was a grand time to educate yourself with all the things you'd get into. And I could go on with list after list of that.
Tell me about school in those days. Where did you go to school?
Pandora's box here. Orange.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the greatest success in school because it's very stubborn. And since then I've learned is that I have one of the worst occasions of ADD. And I've never been a good speller. I'll tell this short. We were doing a written report on something, history, I remember. And every time I'd get to a word that I couldn't spell, I'd draw the picture and then proceed from there. That stuck with me for years because it amazed people and I would have on a one page probably about 12 little drawings. Lots of memories there, lots of memories. But one that always gets me that you never see again is the marble games that would go on outside from here it would be the far end, the northwest end or whatever of the playground area. There were some basketball courts and a lot of sand, and that's where guys would be crawling around on their freshly cleaned trousers or whatever, shooting marbles. And there'd be a number of places they had gathered. This was before school started. So if you got to ride a bus that got there early, you had something to do.
Right. You remember Orange when it was a thriving business community, don't you?
Very definitely.
3 hardware stores, a couple of clothing stores.
Doctors and dentists were not many, but there wasn't a shortage. Most of it was home cure anyway. Yes, it rather amazes one to learn how much industry there was in Orange. And for a lot of people, it was a living. but you weren't going to add anything behind that. You got a job, and you fairly well stuck with that job for the better part of your life. Those with particular skills might have moved on to things, but silk mill, you did the same thing day after day. Velvet mill, VMP, these industries were there. They were the backbone of the town and the area.
Where did you work?
My dad started work at 14 when he dropped out of school to go to work. He incidentally was a honor roll student at that time, but work to support the family was more important. He, in 1927, trying to make sure I get this right, got married, started to build a home, started a business, and 2 years later was 29.
Oh.
And he made it through it all. He was really self-educated, which came to favor his sons most of all. We were fortunate enough to have a dad who was successful and was known as an honest person who could work for anyone, town of Orange County, whatever. Back in the day when things were really tough, and at that period of time they were, there was little work to be done that paid, and you scratched to make it.
You went to work for your father, correct?
We grew up knowing we would. Because Dad didn't let you forget it. That's what you were preparing for. That's what he expected. It's the old family way. And the problem came when there were 3 sons and 1 business. So when the sons grew up and eventually took over the business, we divided into 3 areas, primary areas. I was sheet metal and roofing. Brother C.C. managed the service work, heating, air conditioning, service work. And Brother Charles managed the plumbers and the business overall. He had come along first in the family and therefore became the educated person. He went to Tech and received his mechanical engineering. The next 2 that came along, we were a little more free, you might say. But we didn't feel the same amount of responsibility. We went into business because, number one, it was expected to the family business. But also, you had learned as you came along, and you learned where you fit into that structure. I was the daredevil who would climb any tree, any ladder, anything, And that pretty well presented me with good pair of legs for climbing ladders. As when we were kids, the underground reservoir there was just being built. And it also presented us with a place to roller skate. Although the neighborhood there did not like the racket. So there was this little bit of friction, this play going on. At the time, we had an old 35 Dodge pickup that when I reached driving age, my dad yielded and bought a truck to replace it. So I had that as a runabout. And say Saturday night or whatever, you'd get a few friends together, and if they wouldn't fit in the front seat, there's certainly plenty of room in the back. And we'd go up Marshall Heights, park the truck where we were shielded from, I don't know whether to give directions in east-west, from being seen.
Mm-hmm.
We'd get out, fasten on our skates, and skate a while. We happened to get in trouble by doing it because several times police would come and run us off. And then we surmised that we were being reported somehow. So our detective side went about finding out where our problem was. But this was not something that day would have been considered unlawful. It was a bunch of mischievous boys looking to use up some excess energy. We learned to go park the truck where it couldn't be seen, which was right at the edge then. The street's been elevated since, but you could skate on the reservoir over to where the truck was parked, hop down, get in the truck, take the brake off, and roll downhill without even starting it. But the more interesting part to me, there was a policeman who was on night duty at that time. I don't think there's anything wrong with using his name, but Macon Davis. Macon was a quiet person, respected by the local, as in that day you did respect law enforcement. And Macon had a flashlight about that long. Somewhere in Cluff, it looked like it was about 18 inches long. You would go skating, and all of us would keep our eyes open because we knew sooner or later someone was coming. We knew what direction it would come from. It was always the same direction. We were parked at the opposite end of that direction. And sooner or later, someone would let the rest of us know that they saw a flashlight flashing around in the trees and that Macon was on the way. And we'd all skate off, and that's when we jumped in the truck and vamoosed. It was after considerable, figuring all of these things out, that we attributed the flashlight in the trees not to nighttime squirrel hunting, but for somebody sending a signal that somebody was making. He didn't want to catch us. He didn't even want to confront us, but he knew we would be gone. I remember one time what we used to call the Leggett's parking lot, which was behind this door, And the whole parking area is there now. It used to be grown up in weeds that were taller than your head. So you had paths all through there. And in one particular direction we went, there was this cardboard and whatever else you could make a somewhat protected place to stay. An old fella lived there. And he was the then day of street people. So after the carnival, we had a lot of money. I don't know how many pennies, but we... And we were trying to decide what we could do. So we decided that fella needed our help. So we took a cut out of the money we'd made at our carnival. And 2 or 3 of us marched down the alley by Leggett's and out into the weeds to find him. And we gave him the money.
Wow.
In hopes that he would use it wisely. Unfortunately, we learned one of the better lessons we ever did, because then someone of us was assigned to watch him to see what he did. We wanted to know that he'd gone maybe to get a new pair of overalls or something. He went to the liquor store. Big lesson. There are so many times, there's no way you remember them all.
Right. Right.
But in the hot summertime, you were always listening for a place to go swimming. Well, I lived in the area of Church Run, or at least that side of town. And we could get 2 or 3 guys and bicycles together that thought there was nothing like going swimming. So I learned how to skinny dip in Church Run. We'd ride a couple miles, we'd be at our swimming hole. Also, we knew of an old swimming pool that was out by itself, grown up, and it was full of water. I wonder how it would hold it, but it was full of water always. It was a stretch, but we could ride our bikes, get there, and jump in the pool. But you didn't stay long because the very racket of us jumping in and so on woke the critters up. The critters being some variety of snake. And they would come crawling up out of the pool. And when your bravery ceased to continue, you got the heck out of there. We didn't know what variety they were, but we'd take a short dip, but after we saw things like that, that was enough.
Sure was. So where do you see the town of Orange in the future?
I'm very glad to see some of the things that are going on. That's as far as you want to look sometimes. There are a lot of things that could be better, but I'd rather dwell on the good ones. What am I concerned about? Well, you don't have to look long if you remember back when. The American silk mill worked day and night. There was a fence around the entire complex with a guard at the gate. The windows were all blue shade. The glass was shaded blue. If you look close, you'll probably find some around there. That was there because of the World War II. It was a very important job that the silk mill was doing. And they like to scare us, I think, by getting these tales going. The blue windows were there to shade the lights as they worked at night, which makes sense. But you could stretch the story beyond that because the bombers could reach from wherever to get there. The town had at that time a force of men, older men generally, because younger men were more scarce. And sometimes I'm able to think of what they were called. But I went with my father out to the Carter property next to the cemetery. And there was a shack built out on the hill. And that shack was manned 24/7 by volunteers who were called spotters. And what you were looking for was air activities. You had to recognize what direction they were coming from, what direction they were going, how high they were flying, any other identification you could make. Well, Dad worked there at night because he had a business during the day. I think his shifts might have been 6 hours. And inside this shack with the wood stove in the winter, there was a card table and a couple of chairs and a telephone. And you couldn't talk because then you couldn't hear a plane. And all you had to go by at night was sound and blinking lights. Or I remember that effort very much. Another one was the old Clark Manufacturing Building. And I don't remember the number of times, but I certainly remember carrying my dad's supper in a lunchbox as he sat at a lathe making brass parts for brass shells or bombs or whatever. The war effort was quite something. I had picked more milkweed pods because the seeds were used then for flotation devices.
Oh.
Mae West. And I wonder if that's why we don't have milkweed today. We do have milkweed, but few. I remember when now pastures used to be full of them. That's where we'd pick them. Of course, every tin can that came along had to have the top and bottom cut out of it, be stomped flat and saved to turn in. Everyone that way had responsibilities.
Today, we don't have near as many businesses in Orange as we did then, or even 50 years ago.
No, but you had more grocery stores. I could name you 7 or 8 right quickly. You'd start into Orange from let's say Gillum's Mill, we'll have that out. Food Lion. Come down, there's a grocery store now, though you wouldn't normally call it that, at Dollar General. We've got quite a few, and that's changed from when they first began. Come down to the Sheets area, and there was Higginbotham's store. Across the street, incidentally, was a High's ice cream. Continue up that That way there was Little Chief, which was a grocery store. Getting into Orange on the left, there would have been Safeway. Next block up would have been A&P. Now you're getting into the Main Street area. I'm trying not to duplicate because some of these stores moved. But there was Tomlinson Brothers.
Sparks.
Sparks, thank you. There was Rollins Meat Market. Though they specialized in meat, they had few groceries sold as well.
Sunnyside.
Sunny South. Sunny South store delivered your groceries. On and on. Let's see. They would leave Orange early morning, break of dawn, on a flatbed on the old train, and ride to Wolftown, and then bear right down across the river and up to the end of where they were cutting trees and literally building the railroad. Railroad being a narrow gauge railroad. And my dad told the story of Friday, Saturday it would have been, because in those days you worked 6 days a week. And every payday Saturday, you come home with a pocket full of money, and unfortunately you'd spend a good bit of it in the wrong place. This particular Saturday, I'm sure got paid, but he watched the others get paid. Everybody's jovial and feeling good. But that day they had gone deep enough into the mountains to bang up against some bootleggers or moonshiners, whichever might have been the case. And so when the guys got on the train to go home, they had made some purchases already, including the engineer. Dad said he prayed all the way home. And he'd guarantee that the train stayed off the rail more than it was on it. And that's the kind of era that led into what we are today. We've calmed down a little bit, I think. But
Yeah. Anything you'd like to add?
I would like to see Orange, and this sounds strange, but I'd like to see Orange stay very much what it has been. A residential area with a good bit of cultural things going on, good bit of participation by the citizens of Orange. If you really needed help in this town, you'd have to figure where to start lining people up. I mean, and I'm talking about serious challenges. But one of the more beneficial things is that the town be industrious enough to have jobs for everyone, and yet maintain enough of its past to feel proud of it, and so that others would feel proud of it.